Brace yourselves. The next few years are going to be some of the bloodiest, most catastrophic years that we've ever experienced as Americans in our living lifetimes. Did you know that we are on the cusp of a war with China? We're currently in a non-hot war because we're just doing a trade war. We've escalated tensions massively. And this kind of tension and brinksmanship only leads to one thing: armed conflict, the clash of the superpowers. And this clash is going to have long-term repercussions that I think are going to undo the entire United States. I think we're facing a crisis, not as bad as the Great Depression. No, even worse. A crisis on the level of the American Civil War, where half the freaking country broke away. Why do I think this is all going to take place? Well, like I said, the tensions with China are massively increasing. We're tariffing them, they're tariffing us back. We're threatening more tariffs, which are going to go into effect tomorrow. And tit for tat, escalation, escalation, escalation. And escalation always leads to one thing, because when you make a country desperate, if you make China too desperate and they're suffering immensely and their economy's imploding, because their economy's already under threat from a property collapse and lack of consumption, if you push the Chinese too far, they will respond. They will potentially invade Taiwan. They will clap back at the United States. And we, America, will fight them, because a lot of our critical chips that we need to power the AI revolution and that power our economy are manufactured in Taiwan. And the war that will follow will be some of the biggest bloodshed that you've ever seen in your entire life. Because as a young person in America, you haven't seen a real massive kinetic war. Sure, you've heard about Russia and Ukraine, but you don't really feel it. You don't really experience it, because people you know are not in the trenches. You're not seeing people dying all the time. You're not reading news articles or newspapers with lists of names of hundreds of thousands of dead. But that will happen if we fight China, because China is not Afghan Taliban. China is not Iraqi insurgents. China is a near-peer adversary with a massive army and a decently highly trained army. And when you have a war between two near-peer adversaries, you're looking at Russia-Ukraine level or even World War II level of casualties, utter annihilation of human beings. And this is imminently going to happen, in my opinion. I think the escalation is getting nasty. What are the results of this war? Well, I think America will win the war. I think we'll stop the invasion of Taiwan. But the consequences are going to be so dire that I think it's going to lead to the crumbling of the United States of America. First of all, the war will explode our budget deficits. We will experience massive deficits, the likes of which you have not seen since the pandemic, and probably worse. Because while Taiwan is contested, that's going to grind to a halt the global economy. That is going to grind to a halt the American economy, which is dependent massively on technology. So our tax collections are going to drop massively. We're going to have to mobilize the population. We're going to have to call up the reserves. And if it gets bad enough, potentially institute a draft. And all of that cost is going to be financed by federal deficits. It's going to be financed by borrowing at a massive scale. And when the war is finally over, when we eventually defeat the Chinese in the air, in the seas, but not on land, because we're not invading China. It's impossible. You know what's going to be left over? We're going to have hundreds of thousands of dead. We're going to have a huge government debt burden. You think it's bad now? It's going to be way worse. And you know what America's going to do to respond to that? Do you think we can continue to spend like we are? You think we're going to be able to spend like we have been these past couple of decades, running massive deficits when we pack on trillions and trillions of more of debt? No. We're going to have to do a massive, massive pullback in government spending and probably raise taxes to pay down the deficit, to pay down the massive debt pile. And you know what's going to happen? Economic catastrophe. Americans have been living on borrowed time. Americans have been living on a debt-fueled economy. The government has been subsidizing the private sector by keeping tax rates artificially low, spending beyond its means, and basically pumping the consumer economy. And when that gravy train ends, when Americans experience a tax increase, when they experience massive, massive economic pressures, the United States is going to crack. It's going to split up into a bunch of nasty disgusting civil wars. Because the only thing that holds America together is our economic strength. When people are fat and happy, sure, there's going to be some disagreements. Americans, they get mad at each other. There's some drama, watch the news. But it's not horrible. But when economies really collapse, when things get really bad, that's when nasty stuff starts to happen. Go reference Weimar Germany back in right after the First World War. They had massive hyperinflation, and you had a huge resurgence in communist parties, leftist parties, and right-wing fascist parties. And the commies and the fascists fought, and guess who won? The fascists. Because things were so bad. People were sucked to one side or the other. There was no center. There was only extreme left and extreme right. And when the extreme right took over, things got absolutely nasty. And that goes both ways. Even if the extreme left wins, things will get bloody. And in America, we're more divided than Germany back then in the 1920s. You want to know why? Because Germany at least was homogenous, okay? Sure, they had different ideologies, but they didn't have that additional tension, that additional friction point of having diverse cultural groups in the United States. And diversity always leads to conflict when times are bad. When people are struggling to pay bills and they're losing their jobs, they turn on each other. And the seeds of our destruction as a country are built into it. Because diversity, you can already see the ripple effects. You can see the racial tensions. You can see the hatred between all the different peoples of the United States. But the current good economy, or the decent economy, has kind of tampered that down. But if you look back at 2020, remember the lockdowns? Remember that? Yeah, it was a bad time, wasn't it? What happened? Protests exploded around the world, especially after the George Floyd incident. The country was tearing itself apart. There was insane racial tension. And it was all caused by a bad economy, by lockdowns, by people not working. The seeds of America's destruction are built into the demographics of the country. Because when the economy goes bad, the different peoples, the different groups of this country will turn on each other. Because the more diverse you are, the more likely you are to experience a conflict. If you hang out with somebody that is very similar to you, same ethnicity, same religion, same activities they like to do, sure, you might fight with that person or have disagreements with them, but there are less friction points, okay? We believe in the same things. We like the same things. Probably not going to fight as much. No problems. But if you hang out with somebody that is extremely different from you, different ethnicity, different beliefs in the economy, different religion, different cultural beliefs, the tension points are so much more available. There's so many flashpoints of conflict that exist. The more somebody is different from you, the more likely you are to have conflict with them. And when the economy's good, you can kind of like deal with each other. You can kind of have a good time with each other. You can kind of ignore each other. You may have some arguments here and there. But when times get bad and people are desperate, the more different they are, the more diverse they are, the more likely you're going to experience massive conflict. And I believe this could potentially trigger some kind of civil war in the United States. Maybe not at the likes of, whole states seceding, but you're going to have conflict within states, massive conflict within states, massive societal chaos, unlike anything you've ever experienced in your lifetime. This is what I think we're slowly but inexorably heading to. Slowly, bit by bit. We've been kept together by the government's deficits. We've been kept together by American exceptionalism, the belief in American exceptionalism. And I think where we're heading is going to lead to some serious conflict. So you need to brace yourselves. You need to get ready. If you don't have a lot of savings, you need to freaking save. If you don't have multiple streams of income, diversified across different industries, you need to start working on it. Because when things get bad, which I think they will, they're going to get very bad. And since I mentioned diverse streams of income, check out the pinned comment, book a free 30-minute tax consultation. I am a certified public accountant. Taxes are due April 15th. If you have not paid your estimated payment, you need to file an extension and pay any taxes due by April 15th. If you do not, you may potentially pay penalties or interest. Book a tax consultation with me. We'll set up an estimated payment with your extension. And then when you actually are ready to file your taxes, we can file your taxes after the deadline. Good luck out there.